Isabel Cooper-Oakley, pictured in the photo on the top of this screen, was a well-known English theosophist and author. She was born in India in 1854, and her father was an official in the colonial government. When she was only 23 years old, she suffered an accident which left her unable to walk for 2 years. During this time, she read Madame Helena Blavatsky's great work, Isis Unveiled. This was her introduction into theosophy. She joined the Theosophical Society and eventually became a friend of Helena Blavatsky. In 1890, she was admitted to Blavatsky's London Circle. She was noted for her works on masonry, but she also authored many other books. One of the most well-known of these books was about one of the most mysterious figures in modern history, the famous Comte de St. Germain. The book was titled The Comte de St. Germain, The Secret of Kings, and it was published in 1912. Cooper-Oakley begins the book with a description of the Comte de St. Germain by quoting his friend, Prince Karl von Hesse, who said this in his memoirs about St. Germain. He was perhaps one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, the friend of humanity, wishing for money only that he might give to the poor, a friend to animals. His heart was concerned only with the happiness of others. Who was this mysterious man? In this video, I'll be presenting how Cooper-Oakley answered this question. Before I do that, however, here are what just a few other sources said about him. Many describe him as a mystic and a philosopher. Manly Palmer Hall describes St. Germain as the great illuminist, Rosicrucian, and Freemason, who termed himself the Comte de St. Germain, is without question the most baffling personality of modern history. His name was so nearly a synonym of mystery that the enigma of his true identity was as insolvable to his contemporaries as it has been to later investigators. No one questioned the Count's noble birth or illustrious estate. His whole personality bore the indelible stamp of gentle breeding. The grace and dignity that characterized his conduct, together with his perfect composure in every situation, attested the innate refinement and culture of one accustomed to high station. The true identity of the Comte de St. Germain was the subject of conversation among the nobility of Europe in the 18th century. It is said that he lived in Europe over a period of 112 years and was an intimate and counselor of kings and princes and accredited messenger of the masters of wisdom. He was a musician, a painter, and a keeper of alchemical knowledge. He seemed to be of great wealth, although he was not known to have any bank accounts. He has been linked to several secret societies. The 18th century philosopher Voltaire once said of him, whether or not it was sarcastic or not, "He is a man who never dies and who knows everything." An anecdote from 1760 gave rise to a legend that St. Germain was immortal. In that year he met an elderly Countess V. Georgi, who appeared at the court of King Louis XV of France through Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of the king. The elderly woman was curious because she had met a Count Germain in Venice in the year 1710, and was astonished because in 1760 he looked as if he had not aged at all. She asked him if it could have been his father she had met in 1710, and he responded, "No, madam, but I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last and the beginning of this century. I had the honor to pay you court then." "Forgive me, but that is impossible," she exclaimed. "The Count I knew in those days was at least 45 years old, and you, at the outside, are that age at present." "Madam, I am very old," he replied with a knowing smile. "But then you must be nearly 100 years old," said the astonished Countess. "That is not impossible," he told her, and continued to recount details of their previous meetings and life in Venice 50 years earlier. In 1762, he traveled to Russia and was said to have taken part in the intrigues which placed Catherine the Great on the throne and advised the commander of the Imperial Russian armies in the war against Turkey. In 1774, he returned to France and allegedly warned King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette that a revolution would topple the monarchy. In 1779, he went to Germany and befriended Prince Charles of the House of Hesse Castle. He lived as a guest in the prince's castle, and according to local records, this is where he died in 1784. However, Comte de St would continue to be seen throughout the 19th and into the 20th century. It was between 1880 and 1900 when Madame Helena Blavatsky claimed he was still alive and working toward the spiritual development of the West. She wrote in the Theosophical Glossary that the Comte de St. was certainly the greatest Oriental adept Europe has seen during the last centuries. In The Key to Theosophy, Blavatsky said this: "During the last quarter of every 100 years, an attempt is made by those masters of whom I have spoken to help on the spiritual progress of humanity. Toward the close of each century, you will invariably find that an outpouring or upheaval of spirituality, or call it mysticism if you prefer, has taken place. Some one or more persons have appeared in the world as their agents, and greater or less amount of occult knowledge or teaching has been given out." Isabel Cooper-Oakley's 1912 biography of Saint Germain is a compilation of letters, diaries, and private records written about the Count by members of the French aristocracy who knew him in the 18th century. Her account of his life is considered to be one of the most credible. The book is divided into 3 parts: theories about Saint Germain's birth and character, his travels and knowledge, and his political and mystical work. The theories about the birth and nationality of Saint Germain are many and various. Different authors portray him as descending from, among many others, the widow of Charles II, King of Spain, the father a Madrid banker, a Portuguese Jew, an Alsatian Jew, a tax gatherer in Rotondo, son of the King of Portugal, and Franz Leopold, Prince Ragosi of Transylvania. Cooper-Oakley concludes that the last possibility seems to have been the correct view, according to most reliable sources, that Count de St. was the son of Franz Leopold, Prince Ragosi of Transylvania. Prince Karl of Hesse-Kassel, who invited the Count to live with him during his later years at his castle, wrote this about him in his memoirs in 1861. "Some curiosity may be felt as to his history. I will trace it with the utmost truthfulness, according to his own words, adding any necessary explanations. He told me that he was 88 years of age when he came here, and that he was the son of Prince Ragosi of Transylvania by his first wife. He was placed, when quite young, under the care of the last Duke de Medici. When de St. Germain learned that his 2 brothers, sons of the Princess of Hesse-Wanfried, had become subject to the Emperor Charles VI and had received the titles and names of St. Karl and St. Elizabeth, he said to himself, 'Very well, I will call myself Sanctus Germano, the Holy Brother.' I cannot in truth guarantee his birth, but that he was tremendously protected by the Duke de Medici I have learned from another source." The whole life of M. de St. Germain seems to have been more or less shadowed by the political troubles and struggles of his father. Cooper-Oakley says that this involved the efforts of one Ragosi after another to preserve the freedom of their principality and to save it from being swallowed up by the rapidly growing Austrian Empire under the influence of the Roman Church. Prince Franz Leopold Ragosi, however, provided in his will in 1736 for all 3 of his sons. King Louis XIV had bought landed property for Prince Ragosi from the Polish Queen Maria, the rents of which were invested by the order of the King of France in a hotel in Paris. Therefore, any theories that Saint Germain was a homeless and penniless adventurer who sought to make money by charlatan methods were but the use of the writers of that day who sought to smear his reputation. The Comtesse de Genlis, in her memoirs, writes this about him, from the period of about 1757. He was well acquainted with physics and was a very great chemist. My father, who was well qualified to judge, was a great admirer of his abilities in this way. He had discovered a secret respecting colors which was really wonderful, and which gave an extraordinary effect to his pictures, but would never consent to give up his secret. The travels of Saint Germain were many, and his personal friends were in high position, chiefly Austrians and Hungarians, all men of high birth and noble family. From 1737 to 1742, he visited the court of the Shah of Persia, where, according to Cooper-Oakley, this is where he acquired his knowledge of diamonds and precious stones. The lady's maid and personal confidant of Madame Pompadour, Madame du Haussett, tells this story. The king ordered a middling-sized diamond, which had a flaw in it, to be brought to him. After having it weighed, His Majesty said to the Count, The value of this diamond as it is, and with the flaw in it, is 6,000 livres. Without the flaw, it would be worth at least 10,000. Will you undertake to make me a gainer of 4,000 livres? St. Germain examined it very intently and said, "It is possible it may be done. I will bring it to you again in a month." At the time appointed, the Comte de St. Germain brought back the diamond, without a spot, and gave it to the king. It was wrapped in a cloth of amianthos, which he took off. The king had it weighed immediately and found it very little diminished. His Majesty then sent it to his jeweler by M. de Gontat without telling him of anything that had passed. The jeweler gave him 9,600 livres for it. The king, however, sent for the diamond back again and said he would keep it as a curiosity. He could not overcome his surprise and said M. de St. Germain must be worth millions, especially if he possessed the secret of making large diamonds out of small ones. The Count never said that he could or could not, but positively asserted that he knew how to make pearls grow and give them the finest water. The king paid him great attention, and so did Madame de Pompadour. M. du Quesnoy once said that St. Germain was a quack, but the king reprimanded him. In fact, His Majesty appears infatuated with him, and sometimes talks of him as if his descent were illustrious. St. Germain had a seemingly endless knowledge of the world in politics and the social intrigues of the European elite. He was a diplomat for the court of King Louis XV of France. In 1757, he met the legendary Giacomo Casanova, who would later write in his memoirs, "This extraordinary man, intended by nature to be the king of impostors and quacks, would say in an easy, assured manner that he was 300 years old, that he knew the secret of the universal medicine, that he possessed a mastery over nature, that he could melt diamonds, professing himself capable of forming out of 10 or 12 small diamonds one large one of the finest water, without any loss of weight. All this," he said, "was a mere trifle to him. Notwithstanding his boastings, his barefaced lies, and his manifold eccentricities, I cannot say I thought him offensive. In spite of my knowledge of what he was, and in spite of my own feelings, I thought him an astonishing man, as he was always astonishing me." St. Germain worked with many different people, whom he was able to help and teach in various ways. In 1760, King Louis XV sent him on a political mission to The Hague. In that same year, he also traveled to England. The London Chronicle of June 3, 1760, contains a long account of a mysterious foreigner who had just arrived on England's shores. One writer said that St. Germain was well received at court. The Gazette of the Netherlands on January 12, 1761, mentioned him as a person of note to whom marked attention was paid. Johann Carl Philipp Graf von Cobenzl was an 18th century politician in the Habsburg monarchy. On April 8, 1763, he wrote a letter to Prime Minister Prince Wenzel Anton Kaunitz regarding his meeting with St. Germain. He said the following: "It was about 3 months ago that the person known by the name of the Count St. Germain passed this way and came to see me. I found him the most singular man that I ever saw in my life. I do not yet precisely know his birth. I believe, however, that he is the son of a clandestine union in a powerful and illustrious family. Possessing great wealth, he lives in the greatest simplicity. He knows everything and shows an uprightness, a goodness of soul worthy of admiration. Among a number of his accomplishments, he made, under my own eyes, some experiments, of which the most important were the transmutation of iron into a metal as beautiful as gold." An account of St. Germain's trip to Berlin in 1763 comes from the memoirs of M. Dudillon Thibault, a French man of letters. He notes that a Madame de Troussel was anxious to meet St. Germain, and it was arranged for the Comte to come to dinner at her house. He notes that the following conversation took place at supper when the subject of the philosopher's stone came up. The Comte curtly observed that most people who were in pursuit of that were astonishingly illogical, inasmuch as they employed no agent but fire, forgetting that fire breaks up and decomposes, and that consequently it was mere folly to depend upon it for the building up of a new composition. He dwelt much upon this, and finally led the conversation back to more general topics. The author describes St. Germain in appearance as refined and intellectual. He was clearly of gentle birth and had moved in good society, and it was reported that the famous Cagliostro had been his pupil. The pupil, however, never reached the level of his master, and while the latter finished his career without mishap, Cagliostro, on the other hand, was often rash to the point of criminality and died in the prison of the Inquisition at Rome. In the history of M.D. St. Germain, we have the history of a wise and prudent man who never willfully offended against the code of honor, or did aught that might offend our sense of probity. Marvels we have without end, never anything mean or scandalous. Cooper-Oakley notes that St. Germain traveled to various places between 1774 and 1776, including Treisdorf, Leipzig, Dresden, and Hamburg. In 1779, he visited Prince Karl of Hesse and stayed with him as a loved and honored guest. The two men began various experiments together. Prince Karl Hesse Castle wrote some of these in his memoirs. He alluded to the early education of St. Germain by the Duc de Medici and stated that this house, Medici, as it is well known, was in possession of the highest knowledge, and it is not surprising that he should have drawn his earlier knowledge from them. But he claimed to have learned that of nature by his own application and researchers. He thoroughly understood herbs and plants and had invented the medicines which he constantly made use of and which prolonged his life and health. Looking back at the record of all the powers and abilities possessed by this great man, one point comes out clearly. Either he was following some definite plan, a plan not known to the general world, or he wandered from place to place without aim, without family, without human ties. A sorrowful life truly for so gifted a mortal, if this were so. One of the most fascinating stories Cooper-Oakley relates in her book is taken from the very rare and valuable Souvenirs de Marie Antoinette by the Countess de Adhemar, who had been an intimate friend of the Queen and who died in 1822. The Countess related in her memoirs a prophecy made to her by St. Germain about the year 1793, where he warned her of the approaching sad fate of the Queen, and in response to her question as to whether or not she would see him again, he replied, 5 times more, do not wish for the 6th. She writes that the dates when she saw St. Germain again were at the assassination of the Queen, at the coming of the 18th Brumaire, the day following the death of the Duc d'Enghien in 1804, in the month of January 1813, and on the eve of the murder of the Duc de Berry in 1820. These dates are of interest, of course, because the generally accepted opinion is that St. Germain died in 1784, though some writers say he only retired from public work. Is it possible that the Comte de St. Germain wished to disappear from public life, and publishing his death in church records was the manner in which he achieved this? The diary of Madame de Adhemar shows how St. Germain tried to warn the royal family of the evils which were about to take place. He wished to make the king and queen understand that several of their most trusted advisers were plotting against them to wreck their kingdom. According to Madame de Adhemar, St. Germain told her that a gigantic conspiracy is being formed, which as yet has no visible chief, but he will appear before long. The aim is nothing less than the overthrow of what exists, to reconstruct it on a new plan. There is ill will towards the royal family, the clergy, the nobility, the magistracy. There is still time, however, to baffle the plot. Later, this would be impossible. The King of France, I repeat, has no time to lose. When the madam reported this to the Queen replied, "It is strange. Yesterday I received a letter from my mysterious correspondent. He warned me that an important communication would shortly be made to me, and that I must take it into serious consideration on pain of the greatest of misfortunes. The coincidence of these two things is remarkable unless, however, they come from the same source. From the time of my arrival in France, and in every important event in which my interests have been concerned, a mysterious protector has disclosed what I had to fear." Madame de Adhemar recounts that she then received a note from St. Germain in which she was cautioned to keep yourself in retirement. I will watch over you. Be prudent, and you will survive the tempest that will have beaten down all. I resist the desire that I have to see you. What should we say to each other? You would ask of me the impossible. I can do nothing for the king, nothing for the queen, nothing for the royal family, nothing even for the Duc d'Orleans, who will be triumphant tomorrow, and who, all in due course, will cross the capital to be thrown from the top of the Tarpeian Rock. Nevertheless, if you would care very much to meet with an old friend, go to the 8 o'clock Mass at the Récollet, and enter the second chapel on the right hand. The Countess d'Adamar was shocked when she received the note because it meant that St. Germain, who was said to have died in 1784, had reappeared to her yet again. She met St. Germain at the church and relays their conversation in her diary. When St. Germain tells her that the hour of repose is past, his warnings were not heeded, and the decrees of Providence must be fulfilled, she asks him, in plain words, what do they want? To which he replies, the complete ruin of the Bourbons. They will expel them from all the thrones they occupy, and in less than a century they will return to the rank of simple private individuals in their different branches. When she tells him, you are a terrible prophet, when shall I see you again? He replied, 5 times more, do not wish for the 6th. At the end of the conversation, St. Germain disappeared. She writes in her memoirs, then he had made himself invisible. I am lost in astonishment. The date at which these events were taking place was 1788. Cooper-Oakley notes that these passages, again, are most notable because they literally predicted the future of France, proving the veracity and accuracy of that prophet who was sent to warn her of the doom to come. Is it possible, again, that the Comte de St. Germain wished to disappear from public life and he merely published his deaths in church records as a way to achieve this? There is evidence from several Masonic sources that Cooper-Oakley lists that St. Germain did not die in 1784. One Masonic source states the following. Among the Freemasons invited to the Great Conference at Williamsbad, 15th of February 1785, we find St. Germain included St. Martin and many others. A Catholic source, the late librarian of the great Ambrosiana Library at Milan, writes in 1867, and when in order to bring about a conciliation between the various sects of the Rosicrucians, the Necromantists, the Kabbalists, the Illuminati, the Humanitarians, there was held a great congress at Williamsbad. Then in the lodge of the Amici Riuniti, there also was Cagliostro with St. Martin, Mesmer, and St. Germain. St. Germain also visited Austria and there met with Franz Anton Mesmer, a German physician whose system of therapeutics known as mesmerism was the forerunner of the modern practice of hypnotism. One Austrian writer quoted by Cooper-Oakley had this to say about the connection between St. Germain and Mesmer. Dr. Mesmer, who knew the Count de St. Germain well from his stay in Paris, requested him to come to Vienna in order that he might pursue his study of animal magnetism with him. St. Germain stayed secretly here and was then known as the American of the Felderoth, which later became Laschia House. Dr. Mesmer was much helped by the Count, and in Vienna, Mesmer's teachings were written down. Soon Mesmer gained followers, but he was obliged to leave the town. He went to Paris, where his Harmonious Society, a secret society of savants, continued to exist. In Vienna, St. Germain came in touch with many mystagogues. He visited the famous laboratory of the Rosicrucians in the Landstrasse behind the hospital, where he instructed for some time his brethren in the sciences of Solomon. The last half of Cooper-Oakley's books contains an extensive appendices section. It contains many documents, including correspondence and letters, extracts from memoirs, and various other archival material. I found her work to be well researched and quite credible. In conclusion, Cooper-Oakley describes St. Germain as a messenger from that spiritual hierarchy by whom the world's evolution is guided. She writes that he acted as a true messenger of the Great Lodge because he taught those fundamental principles upon which all true masters are bound to teach: the evolution of the spiritual nature of man, reincarnation, the hidden powers of nature, purity of life, nobleness of ideal, and the divine power that is behind all and guides all.